neighborhood search that our private investigators did, the FBI, when it was presented to them, still said that Paul Benassi was not credible and they would not investigate that aspect of Johnny's case. The FBI never did do the neighborhood search until I complained so many times and so bitterly to our senators, Senator Grassley and Harkin, both from Iowa, that the senators got in touch with the FBI office in Washington, and then the FBI in Des Moines were forced to do the neighborhood search, house by house. And one of the neighbors told me that the FBI was very disgruntled when they showed up to have to do the interview 3 years later, and said the only reason they were coming out to do it is because Mrs. Gosch forced it through the senators, that they had not intended to do it at all. The whole point with all of this, in my mind, is why? Why would a police chief not investigate? Why would he not do the things necessary to try and find my little boy? And why would the FBI refuse to investigate a bona fide kidnapping case that had witnesses? Why would they keep saying, "We have no crime"? I got so sick of hearing that phrase, "we have no crime," that it just about destroyed me. Were they that stupid? Did they not know how to investigate a case like this? Were they naive? Were they just compliant in protecting some bigwig that was a pedophile? Or were they involved in it themselves? Those are the questions that I've had all these years, and I have formed my own opinion as to why I think they did not investigate my son's case properly. And I believe that it is the last. It is involvement. A few months after my son was kidnapped, approximately 6, there was a young boy kidnapped on the way to school. He was a high school kid, and he was driving an Eldorado Cadillac. And the kidnappers used the kid's cell phone to call the parents and tell them that they wanted a ransom demand of money. The FBI sent in many agents to Des Moines. They had the kid back within 36 hours. The next day, the FBI came to my home to gloat at how well they did the case. And Special Agent Herb Hawkins, who was in charge of a 5-state area, led the team as they came into my home. And he said to me that they really had to work on that case because there was a human life at stake. And my reaction was, well, what do you think my son is? Don't you think his life matters? And Herb Hawkins said to me, and I will never forget this, he looked at me and he said, "Mrs. Gosch, there's something you don't understand. The other family, they're very wealthy. They're very prominent in Des Moines. We had to search for their son because they just are more prominent people than you are." Mr. Hawkins had no idea, but he did me a favor that day because he told me what the story really was. And I don't remember doing this, but I evidently picked up a coffee cup full of hot coffee, and I hurled it across the room, and the cup and the coffee missed Herb Hawkins' face by about 1/4 of an inch. At that point, he said, I can see that you're distraught. Is there anything I can do for you?" And I said, "Yes, you can get the hell out of my house. Don't ever come back. If you're not going to investigate my son's case, then step aside because I'm coming through. I will find out what happened to my son, regardless of whether you accept the information or whether you don't. I will at least know before I die."
Okay, what about the Johnny Gosch Foundation? Tell us about that and also the laws that you had passed, more details on the laws.
Okay. Johnny was missing only about a month when I decided to form the Johnny Gosch Foundation. The foundation was to help raise money to pay for private investigators to search for Johnny. That was the primary goal in the beginning. As soon as we filed for a 501(c)(3) standing, the IRS contacted us and told us that that had never been granted before for a child that was currently missing, only for a child that had been found dead, and that we would have to prove that we were doing something for other children. And we were put on a 2-year probationary period, which we passed with flying colors, because it was during that time that I drafted the first piece of legislation called the Johnny Gosch Bill. That bill provided for any family who had a missing child to get an immediate investigation started. No more waiting 72 hours, no more dragging the feet. The FBI would be called in and the investigation would start immediately. That law passed, and within 1 month after the governor signed it into law in 1984, the second newspaper carrier from Des Moines, Iowa, Eugene Martin, was kidnapped in the very same manner as my son. He started out on his route, and 2 men grabbed him and threw him in a car, and off they went. Same scenario, same people. The other pieces of legislation that I facilitated in getting passed were laws that pertain to sexually abused children and the ability for them to testify before video cameras instead of having to relate what happened to them in open courtroom in front of their assailant. We passed a number of laws in 1 year that all had components to the sexually abused child, and we called it the Children's Bill of Rights. A lot of our laws that we passed here in Iowa were adopted by other states that border Iowa, so that we had some uniformity in the central part of the United States as to some type of code on missing and abused children. And it was about at the same time that the National Center for Missing Children in Washington, D.C. was formed. They had gathered parents of missing children and flown us all to Texas to testify before the Justice Department on video. We were to tell what went wrong in our cases, and we were to name names in terms of the police chief, the FBI, whoever didn't do their job. We were to explain how they didn't do it, why they didn't do it. I was one of the parents that participated. When it was my turn to speak, I related what happened to my son and the mistakes on the case. At the end of my speech, I stated that if the FBI was not going to investigate missing children's cases, then the Justice Department should cut their funding. And they should take that amount of money and give it to the organization to start a missing children's center, so that those of us who have missing children would have some government agency to turn to for assistance. At the time I did that, you could hear a pin drop in the room. John Walsh, who is now with America's Most Wanted, at that time he was just a grieving parent like I was, he came rushing over to me and he said, "I can't believe you said that. I can't believe you said to cut their funding." And I said, "John, I meant it. If they're not going to do the job, cut their funding and give it to someone who will." I said, "I'm very serious about it. Why does everyone think the FBI is a sacred cow that you can't challenge? They didn't do the job for my son. They didn't follow their own code of ethics for the criteria of a kidnapping case. Perhaps if they would have moved a little swifter, Johnny would be with me today." Ted?
Okay, what about your husband being a suspect? You suspect he might be involved?
Okay. A number of years after Johnny was kidnapped, I had the occasion to go to John DeCamp's office in Lincoln, Nebraska. and we were going to be discussing some avenues on the case to help bring it more towards a legal resolution and solving it. I entered the room, and John came over. I had never met him before. And he came over and grabbed a hold of my hand. He was very gracious, and he said, "Oh, Noreen, it is so good to see you again. It's been such a long time." And I looked at him and I said, "John, I've never been to your office before. I've never met you before." He said, "Well, of course you did. You came over here in 1988 or 1989 with your husband. And we all went out to the prison to talk to Paul Benassi." And I said, "No, it wasn't me. I have never been here." So at that point, John DeCamp called his main secretary and office manager in, and he said, "Didn't John Gosch come over here in 1988 or 89, and didn't he bring Noreen, and didn't we go out to the prison?" And Jan said, "Yes, he did, yes, you did, but it wasn't this woman." And she pointed at me. "He brought somebody else that looks like her. It's not the same woman." I didn't know what to say. I was speechless. They later got out all of their telephone records going back to 1988 and 89, and we discovered that there had been a phone number and a fax number set up in Des Moines where John DeCamp was to call and or fax information on Johnny's case. But he was instructed to never, ever call the Gosch home and disturb Mrs. Gosch, only to use this other number, which has since been disconnected. Since that situation has taken place, I have learned and met 25 other people that all had been introduced to this other woman that my ex-husband made everyone believe was me. She looked a lot like me, and with the help of John DeCamp and the Attorney General of Nebraska, I was able to learn her identity and get her photograph. This made my husband look very suspect. How and why would he have an imposter of his wife, Johnny's mother, traveling around the country with him, going to speeches, going to prisons, speaking in many circles concerning his son? It took me a number of years to find out about all of this, but now that I have the truth, now that I know the information, it makes the big question mark over my ex-husband's head that much larger. What part did he play in this? Why on earth would he need to have an imposter? What was the purpose of all of this? There's no answers at this point other than perhaps he was involved in something that he was trying to keep from me as well. That may come out later. In the meantime, I've written a book, and my book is called Why Johnny Can't Come Home. It gives the entire story of Johnny's kidnapping. Who, how, why. And in this book, you'll find a picture of my ex-husband with the woman that he has professed to others and introduced to others as me. It has come to my attention, and I've been informed, that the woman posing as me, once she learned that her picture is in my book, has now had a stroke. I have not given her name publicly because it is still undetermined as to whether charges will be filed against her for impersonating me. And so until such time as she's charged with a crime, I cannot reveal her name publicly in this format. But all of this went on behind the scenes in the Johnny Gosch case. Now I ask anybody who's viewing this video, does this sound like a normal kidnapping case to you, where some pedophile would grab a kid, use them, and kill them? No. Police, FBI not cooperating, someone impersonating the mother receiving death threats. None of these things are typical in a normal kidnap case.